Hello, my name is Pat McArdle. I live in Southern California and have been involved in the promotion of clean cooking for the world's poorest people since 2005, which is the year I came home from a one-year tour of duty in northern Afghanistan. That whole story is told elsewhere, and I'll let you know where you can find my Afghanistan story. Anyway, my main focus has been on solar thermal cook stoves, but I've always seen clean cooking as a combination of technologies, including biomass stoves, and the least expensive of them all, retained heat cooking. 18 years ago, that was in 2007, I met the renowned and brilliant Larry Winiarski at a Rotary-sponsored healthcare workshop in Hidalgo, Mexico. Larry was there to teach the Mexican attending the health clinic how to build rocket stoves using bricks and tin cans and how to make retained heat cooking containers, also known as hay boxes. I was there with other solar cooking volunteers to teach people waiting in line for medical care how to make and use a solar cooker. Since there were quite a few solar cooking experts with way more experience than I had, I spent most of my time that week learning about biomass stoves and retained heat cooking from Larry. Larry started with the easy stuff, teaching all of us how to make and use a homemade retained heat basket that could simmer food using no fuel at all. Here are three pictures I took of Larry in Mexico, teaching the Mexican women how to make retained heat baskets out of very simple and very available materials. Larry also taught us that homemade retained heat containers were a far more reliable and less expensive way to simmer food than a biomass stove, even one that included a built-in simmer function, which could break, as Larry often reminded me. Even with a working simmer function, the cook would still need to sit next to her stove and feed fuel into the combustion chamber for as long as the simmer continued. Much to Larry's delight, I filmed his rocket stove demonstrations in Mexico, and the following year turned them into the first two videos, how to make a 16-brick rocket stove and how to make a tin can rocket stove, on the YouTube channel Solar Wind Mama that I had started in 2008.
Okay, we're going to construct a stove with just adobe bricks. Adobe bricks have a lot of sawdust or shavings in them, and that makes the brick lighter and more insulating. It's a very inexpensive way to make a stove.
Larry was thrilled when he saw my videos, since he told me that no one had ever filmed him teaching people how to make rocket stoves. He was even happier when I wrote to him a few years later that more than 859,000 people had watched the two videos. Larry was a truly inspiring guy and with a great sense of humor. Over the years, Larry and I have agreed to disagree about the efficacy of solar cooking technology, which has been my primary focus for the past 20 years. I will, however, be forever grateful to the late, great Larry Winiarski for teaching me how to build rocket stoves, how to make a retained heat basket, and how to deploy them both for maximum efficiency. Larry's mantra was, why add a delicate and easily breakable simmer function to a simple rocket stove when you can simmer food using no fuel at all with a retained heat container made out of a basket or a box stuffed with grass, hay, crumpled newspaper, blankets, or even old clothes? I agree with Larry. The year after I was in Mexico with Larry, I made my first trip to a Sudanese refugee camp in eastern Chad to conduct a survey of solar cooking usage. In our final report, we noted several things. First, the solar cookers the women used were not durable, and we reported that the retained heat containers the women made were not sufficiently insulated, so no one was using them. We also learned that while the refugee women's German-made Save 80 rocket stoves worked well, most of the stoves were sitting in a corner unused. The reason? The ladies told us they did not like having to chop their wood into small pieces, sit next to their Save 80s, and continuously feed slivers of wood into the combustion chamber while boiling or simmering pots of food. In this photo that I took in Tulum refugee camp, you can see a lady cooking her food over her three-stone fire while the Save 80 sits in the background. In my 2023 retained heat cooking video, I use an Aprovecho rocket stove, which I've had for years. I also use one of Aprovecho's incredibly effective Jetstream fans, which I powered with a solar PV charger. The fuel-efficient stove I'm using is an Aprovecho rocket stove with Aprovecho's new Jet Flame, a device that uses a tiny amount of electricity to power a fan that blows air onto the fire, a common practice in many developing countries where women blow on the fire through a straw. I cooked 2 pots of beans on the Aprovecho stove for 20 minutes each, then put 1 pot into each of my 2 retained heat baskets. The first pot of beans in the Wonder Bag was 166 Fahrenheit, 74 Celsius, after 3 hours. The second pot, which I placed in my homemade retained heat basket, was 159 degrees Fahrenheit, 70 degrees Celsius. Both pots of beans were thoroughly cooked, and they were delicious. It's done. Cooked and hot. Cooking with retained heat and no fuel is not a new concept. Here's an excerpt from my YouTube video on retained heat cooking that will show you just how long this technology has been around. In this brief clip from the BBC series Wartime Farm, you'll see how a British farmer's wife deals with fuel rationing by making and cooking with her own hay basket.
There was a popular wartime solution that Ruth's keen to try.
I'm going to make a hay box. Now, the funny thing, a hay box, there's no heat source. It's sort of just insulation. But it does the job that you might think of, say, like a slow cooker. So, hay. And I'm making a really thick layer. Not just on the bottom of the box, but up the sides of the box. And eventually I'll make it in the lid as well. It's all about keeping the heat in. So the stew that I've got on, when it's really thoroughly boiling, and it does have to be thoroughly boiling, then I can transfer it from there straight into here. Smuggle it down in there. And then on the lid, seal it all up. And you've kept the heat in. The heat can't escape, so the heat stays there, carrying on cooking slowly and gently.
There are many websites like the Provident Prepper and even Pinterest that explain the use of retained heat cookers and show you how to make them. Long before the internet, books like the Fireless Cookbook, first printed in 1909 for our great-grandmother's generation and reprinted in 2006 for us, taught people how to make and use this amazingly simple, energy-saving device. A few months after I learned about retained heat cooking from Larry, I was invited to solar cook a meal for some soldiers in the center courtyard of the Pentagon. It was a cold but sunny day, and my plan was to cook and then serve 2 chickens cut up, a pot of rice, and a pot of beans using 4 small solar cookers. At around 1 p.m., it started clouding over, but I had brought a bundle of cut wood, 2 small tin can rocket stoves, and 4 fireless cookers, just in case. I promised the soldiers that by 5 p.m., we were going to eat fully cooked food, even without any more sunshine. It's no surprise that they did not believe me. As the clouds began to hide the sun, I fired up my 2 tin can rocket stoves and brought each partially cooked pot of food to a rolling boil for 20 minutes. Here's one of the coffee can rocket stoves that I used at the Pentagon that day. By 2:30, I had placed each of those bubbling pots of food into one of my 4 well-insulated cardboard retained heat containers. The food continued to cook inside the boxes, using no more fuel. At 5 p.m., I invited the soldiers into our tent and served them a fully cooked chicken, rice, and bean dinner. They were amazed. I'd like to end with this quote by the illustrious Dean Still from a message he wrote in 2001, before some of you were born maybe, on the Stover's listserv. Here it is. Quote, "In a perfect world, perhaps with a great non-polluting wood stove, would come a retained heat cooker, hay box, a solar oven for baking, and a parabolic or conical reflector for boiling water. The whole package might cost $100, which is dinner and a movie for some folks." Now, that was a few years ago that he wrote that, so it might be more than 100, but it's still something that is possible, and I wish more people were working on providing the world's poorest people with this combo of technology. If you want more information on retained heat cooking, I hope you'll watch my 10-minute YouTube video, What in the World is a Retained Heat Cooker? Thanks for watching, and please accept my best wishes as we all strive to make this world a better place.